Hello, my name is Horrifying, and today I have found 6 true encounters people have had with the cryptic creature known as the Dogman, and I will be narrating them here. But before we begin, I did want to ask you to like and subscribe if you end up enjoying my narrations, as that really does help the channel a lot. But without any further ado, let's get into the encounters. The first encounter took place in Colorado, Pueblo, and has been posted by Tammy. A few years ago, I decided to contact the BFRO about having Yetis, or I guess Bigfoot, on my place. I call them Yetis because they have 3 toes instead of 5. And I've heard that that's the distinction people make between the two. I always knew we had more than one cryptid on the place. I live on a river and have about 18 acres of land. The Dogman of this story has been sighted off Lime Road, which also borders my river. I am from Pueblo, Colorado, and I live on the St. Charles River, which dumps into the Arkansas River. My researchers had me put out cams to see if I could catch any Bigfoot activity. I did, and over the years have caught other strange creatures on cam. I call them hybrids. My encounters started when I was 8 years old in 1969, when a huge Bigfoot stood up in front of my dad's Alice Chalmers tractor, and it has continued to this day with other creatures as well. I have a picture of the Dogman I caught in the river. It takes up a span of 4 feet wide. He has huge shoulders and is staring directly at the camera across from it. Yes, it is black, has ears that dip in towards themselves, and scars on its face, and it appears he is not too happy about having his picture taken. I felt very vindicated when I got that picture, and I blew it up on Word so I could get a better look at the creature. Quite ugly to say the least. It is a daylight picture, right about when the sun is setting. Good nonetheless. In the picture, he's not standing, but buffed out, squatting, looking at the camera. That's not all though. I keep my big dogs in at night because I do not want them killed. I have an older blue heeler and an Irish wolfhound mix. He's not as big as an Irish wolfhound, but nonetheless is fast and aggressive. I almost lost him last fall. He was about 3 at the time. I came home and he wasn't there to greet me. I found him pretty beat up, with a 6-inch slice at his groin, which almost cut into his phenol artery. He had no bite marks at all, but he was beat all over his body like something pulverized him. He was so swollen that you could push in on the swelling like you were pushing in on a semi-inflated balloon. I called my pasture neighbor, who indeed said there was a fight in the river at about 9 a.m. She said it sounded horrible and heard the dog screaming. Well, I said it was my dog. This event changed my dog's personality. He's more cautious, and when these creatures are around, will not leave my side, nor will he venture to the river. Irish wolfhounds are ear, sight, and smell dogs, and when he stands on his hind legs, or raises his head smelling the air, and turns around and comes back to me, something is afoot in the river. I have had many instances with these creatures on my place, and I have lost a few good dogs to that river and what runs it. My researchers are mostly into Bigfoot and do not come around much anymore. Matter of fact, one moved away to another part of Colorado. They are cryptozoologists. Gentlemen, be very careful with going into the woods with these things. I can prove these creatures and the others are not what we know as normal animals. Dogmen are very hard to kill, as well as Bigfoot, or as well as the other creatures on my place. I hope you carry a very large caliber weapon when out hunting in the woods. I have a picture of a hybrid that has kind of an ape-like face, huge shoulders, not much body, and lion-like feet. You can see 4 shadows in that picture, and it's quite something. Broad daylight, bright morning, and when I sent it to my researchers, they added some color to the picture to see the creature better and sent it back to me. This is why I say Dogmen, Bigfoots, and the other cryptids out there are giants of old. The second encounter took place in Colorado, Powers County, and was posted by Anonymous. Well, I am a 24-year-old male and live in the middle of nowhere, literally. I will be short and simple about my encounter. I was getting home late one day, after dropping off my sister off at the airport in Lamar, Colorado. I live just under 7 miles north of the Oklahoma border, on 250 acres of land. I have a trap line running around my property for coyotes. The first 2 traps I checked were empty, so I headed south. That's when I saw this thing. At first, I thought it was a coyote. A big coyote. It was almost 5 feet tall, on all 4s. It was caught in my trap, and was running around, making a dust cloud. And then, it stopped and looked at me. Now, I use a Duke number 3 leg hold trap, so I can catch a variety of things in it. Anyways, I slammed on the brakes, and my truck stalled because it's a manual. I was fumbling for the keys to start it. It's an old farm truck with a carburetor on it, and it had quite an afterfire. Once it heard that, it lunged at me and roared. I saw that it had its hand, not paw, but a hand, caught in my trap. Right hand to be exact. It had probably been looking for the dead rabbit I had in the bait hole next to the trap. It then stood up and ripped the 2 earth anchors I had, 20 inches in the ground, right out. It took me a long time to put them in with a 10-pound hammer, but it pulled them straight out within 15 seconds. After it did that, it just stood there, looking at me. It felt like an eternity, and I knew my 357 would do nothing to stop this thing if it came at me. I prayed to God that it wouldn't. In my truck, I was looking at it in shock and awe, and noticed that it had bright orange eyes. They weren't glowing. Instead, they had a tint, like a cat's eyes in the dark. They may have been reflecting my headlights, I can't be sure. It then took a step towards me, curled up its upper lip, showing me its teeth. They were huge. The longest 2 had to have been 4 to 5 inches long. It then growled at me, and then it was gone in the blink of an eye. I was scared crapless. I jammed the truck into gear and spun the tires, getting out of there. Like I said earlier, it seemed like an eternity, but it must have lasted no more than 30 seconds at max. I later returned with an Indian friend of mine. I grew up with him and trusted him. He told me some stories that were passed down through his grandparents' tribe and mentioned something about a loup-garou or French werewolf. He also told me how fur trappers in the late 1700s to 1800s were chased off the land in the Rockies by this thing. I used to work till about 10 to 11 at night, but I sleep with the lights on now. It sounds silly for a 24-year-old to be doing that, but to be honest to God, I'm still frightened by this thing. I haven't bothered going out looking for my lost trap, because I'll bet the thing has torn it apart by now. The third encounter takes place in Kansas, Osage County, and has been posted by Anonymous. Summer 2016. I was driving home from doing some shopping in a nearby town and was all alone, just driving and listening to the radio. It was just before sunset on a beautiful summer day. I was admiring the sky because it was such a bright orange. While driving through some S-curves in the road, I made the first turn and saw some deer dart across the road. I immediately hit the brakes to slow down, not knowing if there were more to come out of the woods. On the opposite side of the road, it drops down a steep embankment to a farm field. I had slowed the car down and scanned the tree line for more deer. That's when this thing jumped out of the woods, running after the deer. He landed in the middle of the road and cleared the rest of the road in his next stride. It's so hard to comprehend what I saw, but it sounds like the descriptions that people have claimed. It was a gray figure with a short, sleek coat. I did not see a tail on this creature. It was on all fours and was the same height as the deer. His head was very odd. It looked like a dog with cropped, pointed ears, but had a very short muzzle. He briefly turned his head towards me when he crossed, and his eyes, I wouldn't say they glowed, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They were like dull yellow, and they definitely stood out. His body was what really confused me, because the way it moved was like a human would move when trying to run on all fours. Its gait looked lazy, like he was just kinda loping across the road. It was very muscular on the front end, but had a very thin, almost sickly looking abdominal area and hind legs. Once he was across the road, I lost sight of him. I was confused as to what I saw that I didn't tell anyone right away for the fear that they would think I was crazy. I have been searching for answers since then, but came up with nothing. I eventually told my husband and one close friend, but neither of them had heard of anything that matched the description. I'm still not 100% sure that I saw Dogman, but it is the only thing I have come across that sounds at least reasonably close to what I saw. The fourth encounter takes place in Kansas, Jackson County, and was posted by Anonymous. Before I say anything about my encounter, I just want to clarify that when I saw this thing, I went to Google and searched up what it was. I came across a website and found that another person in Jackson County had had an encounter with something like this, so I know I'm not crazy. I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years before I had this encounter, and I know that considering Jackson County is about 656 square miles with a population of almost 700,000, and it being practically infested with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, it wouldn't be likely for a large predator such as a wolf to be lurking in this sparse woodland. The average wolf territory is 13 to 2,400 square miles, and it'd be easy for such a huge creature to live just in Jackson County alone. This may even be the very same dog-wolf-man thing that the other person saw. Anyway, on to the encounter. I was just chilling on the laptop in the living room, watching people blow stuff up, when I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I set the laptop down and put my headphones on the keyboard and got out of the chair. Let me clarify. I'm not a bloody psychic or a medium or anything, but I have a sort of sixth sense, I guess you could call it, where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was. We have a huge window on the wall just above the couch, and it was a particularly cold night, so the windows caught things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, and I knew I'd see it if it was. We have motion sensing floodlights, and it'd have to be either standing on something or tall as the devil himself in order to see into the window of our trailer. It was around 6 to 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being around 11 feet. I looked over to the window, and the only thing I could see was the floodlights were on, and something seemed to duck under the window, like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think anything of it, considering our neighbors were sort of druggies and alcoholics, and often came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was locked, so I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, and when I finished, I washed my hands and went back to the laptop. When I got back, I noticed that the floodlights went out, so whatever it was gone. Not thinking anything else of it, I went back to watching people blow stuff up. I should mention that my eyes are somewhat sharp, at least sharp enough to spot a bird about 50 feet away in a tree, so it's no surprise that when the floodlights came back on, I noticed immediately. I glanced up from the screen, expecting a drunken or high idiot to be looking in with a stupid expression on his face. but I was frozen by what I saw. It was a huge, huge wolf that was looking at me with dirty, ambery yellow eyes. Its ears looked like they were torn or cropped or something, and the face looked sort of human-like. Not really a full human face, but more like the jawline looked very muscular and human compared to the rest of its face. Its lips were curled back, and it seemed as if it was snarling, though I couldn't hear it if it was, and its breath caught on the cold glass. It was so tall that the top of his head was halfway up the window, and if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd say maybe the width of my shoulders. I knew that whatever it was, it most likely had wolfish instincts, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as you could, whilst having your throat and underside showing. This is a very common submissive position, and although I was scared out of my mind, I knew that holding eye contact would make me seem like a challenger, and running would make me seem like prey. When I did the submissive position, it must have worked for it to leave me alone, because it just hit the window, which made the entire trailer shake. But then it went away. I hadn't heard or seen anything else like it since, although I do hear the odd howl coming from the back roads. God help the poor idiot that tries to try and hunt this thing down. I can tell you now that whatever it was not friendly, because if it were, it would not have slammed my window as hard as it had, and it would not have been growling like I'd taken its food. Although it practically did assault my window, I could understand why it was upset. I was on its territory after all, an intruder, and possibly a threat to its existence and its prey. It's really just best to stay out of its way and respect it. After all, it is one of God's many strange creatures in the world. The fifth encounter takes place in Minnesota, Otter Tail County, and was posted by Anonymous. I'll start off by saying that I have never believed in any of these sort of creatures, but I saw something in early 2009 that really disturbed me and is making me change my mind. I was not under the influence of anything, and I have better than average eyesight, and the lighting was nearly sunset, but I was still able to see clearly. So, I'll get this underway and explain my story, and maybe someone can shed more light on this for me. I live in Fergus Falls, Minnesota, which is in west central Minnesota, about an hour drive from Fargo, North Dakota. My mother-in-law lives out in the county, about 3 to 4 miles out of Fergus Falls, and I was staying there while my wife and her mother went shopping in town. They called me and asked if I wanted to go to a 7 p.m. movie. So, I left the house at about 6:30 to 6:45 p.m. to meet them at the theater. About 2 miles from their house, on a country road known as the Wendell Road, along the Mistink River, I saw three white-tailed deer. Two of the deer were rather small, probably just yearlings, and a larger doe, who I assumed was their mother. Me, being an avid hunter, lover of wildlife, and future wildlife biologist, stopped to look at the deer. I should also mention that I hunt in the area and have spent my whole life in the Fergus Falls area. The deer were following a small creek bed, which is in fact the Mistink River, so there were hardly any trees, except for maybe one. Maybe, because I didn't see it there, because of the tree, but I just noticed something crouching behind the tree on my side of the road, looking at the deer, and to my belief, hunting them. It just sat there, looking at the deer, taking no notice of me, even though I was in my truck, no more than 40 yards away, with a clear view, with nothing obstructing my view of it. It had one hand on the tree that it was bracing itself with. What struck me as shocking was the fact that it seemed to be a two-legged creature and not a four-legged one. Its hands appeared to have opposable thumbs and were rather slender and long, very unlike a wolf. The creature looked as though if it stood upright, it would be over 7 feet tall, with a protruding muzzle, broad shoulders, a slender waist, thick, muscular thighs, and being as there was snow on the ground, I couldn't see the feet. He was deep, dark brown in color throughout the body. After several seconds of looking at the creature in shock, the deer ran off. Then, something happened. It looked right at me, as though blaming me for losing his meal. He just sat there, looking at me and blinking, but not moving. This scared the crap out of me, so I hit the gas pedal and drove off. It was very dark after the movie, so I didn't much feel like trudging through the 3.5 feet of snow with the possibility of a monster lurking in the area who is currently looking for a meal that I scared off. So, at about 10 a.m., I went back there and walked down to the tree. Under the tree, there was no snow, so there were no tracks that I could see, but leading up to the tree, there were 3 tracks leading in from my grandmother-in-law's field, which was hard, black dirt. And if you know what a Minnesota field looks like in late winter, early spring, you can't make anything out of the dirt. The tracks I did find were only about 6 to 7 inches in length, but were clearly canine prints, with the exception of a 4-toe looking mark in the snow. The 6th encounter takes place in Iowa, Lynn County, and was posted by Anonymous. I was on patrol as a deputy sheriff for the county and was usually assigned to the Highway 13 and Highway 30 corridors. However, I recall that particular July 1st, however, that a young man, 16 or 17-year-old, had been sucked into a storm drain which emptied into Cedar Lake near the Quaker Oats plant. This is a place with heavy foot traffic and located in an urban setting. The area is also bordered by Mohawk Park. As the search went on into the night, the local PD got the county involved. I parked my cruiser at what I believed was the electric company's storage yard. The yard had what I estimated to be a 10-foot fence that ran parallel to a paved bike trail on the other side of which runs a large concrete spillway to siphon off floodwaters. I arrived at what I estimate to be roughly 11:30 p.m. to 11:45 p.m. I estimate only because I assure you there never was, nor ever will be, an official statement or record with my name on it telling this story. As I left the lot, I was at the north end of the lake and headed west on foot. There was a lot of brush and saplings between the spillway and the trail, so I proceeded on to the point that the trail turns south near where Cedar Lake empties into the Cedar River under the railroad tracks leading into Quake Roads. There are multiple tracks at the turn I mentioned before, and only the track furthest from myself had a train on it. With my attention on the spillway, I hardly noticed at first a faint, red-colored light a distance north from my position. It was coming down the track on the other side of the train. I had thought it perhaps the taillights of a car. Not being far from that patrol route, I had no knowledge that there was, in fact, no road in that direction. There ain't much things in the world that scare me, but put simply, I've seen quite a lot in my days, but nothing prepared me for that night. The lights disappeared quickly, and that was that, or so I had figured. About 5 minutes pass before I hear a snorting, almost sniffing sound coming from the other side of the tracks. When I turned, the first thing I saw were the eyes. They glowed a dull red. The thing was at least 8 foot tall, pushing 450 pounds. I judge this by the fact that I am 6'4" and weigh 280. I turned my light, and to this day I wish I hadn't. It had pointed ears and a long muzzle, and it looked me right into the face before it bolted into the woods. It was not a mask, and it was not a person in costume. Who would walk up on an armed man with a police radio in full uniform and risk getting shot? I remember it was surreal. So, final, I guess. I know what's in the dark now. People can say or think what they want, but even with a chambered round and full magazine in a Glock 40, didn't feel like enough firepower. I unholstered and fell back toward the trail and to the electric company storage yard. Putting the fence to my back, I made a hasty retreat to the lot with my cruiser. I don't think I holstered my pistol till I got out of the park. I never spoke of it, and honestly, I don't know why I am now, but one thing is for certain. It knew I was there, and it was watching my every move. I'll never go back, and I no longer work with the department since becoming a minister, but I still carry a Glock with hollow points tipped with silver, if, and I rarely do, leave my home at night. The Dogman is quite a strange and incredibly interesting creature. Even if you do not believe in this being, its mere existence in mythology and folklore raises so many questions. A great one would be, why would so many cultures have a dogman-like creature within their folklore? For example, the Fálad of Ireland, the Sunpurni of Latvia, and of course, the Dogman of America. But either way, I do hope you enjoyed my narrations. But even if you didn't, I want to wish you a good rest of your day.